over to you, Dev.
Thank you, Alim. I'm going to share my screen. So let me find the right one. Okay, and there we go. Oops. So you should be able to see my screen. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. Right. Sorry, I'm just trying to. Okay, brilliant.
Sorry, Dev, before you get started, I just need to mention one thing that I forgot to say, sorry. So look, there will be an opportunity for people to ask questions at appropriate times that we'll cover, and perhaps, after some key slides that Dev goes through. But also, if you want, you can use the chat facility to ask any questions, and I'll raise these on your behalf. Okay, so sorry, Dev, over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alim. Right, so we are here to talk about good project governance and understanding how that has an impact on projects. And just a bit of a brief description of who I am, which I've already been through.
For me, sorry, I'm seeing your slides not in show mode. So I'm not seeing your full slide. I don't know if this is the same for
I'm in
everyone.
show mode here. Okay, let me try again. Can you see that show mode now?
Yeah, so we can see your current slide and the next slide and the notes as things stand.
Oh.
But we can't see it. So
Hello,
this is a better
you can hear
view.
me now?
Hi, Tola, yes, we can. It's working.
Okay,
But yeah,
right.
so Dev, yeah, so we can, so the view that you just had there, Dev, is a better view.
Okay, is that fine?
You can, yeah, I think so. You can proceed with that.
Okay, if that's all right with everyone. Okay, good. So what is project governance? Well, it certainly isn't project management. Project governance is more about providing an oversight function and creating an environment to ensure that the right projects get done and that they get done well. Whereas project governance involves a day-to-day planning, organizing, monitoring, and controlling project activities so that the project can be delivered. They are interrelated, and so a lot of things that we are going to talk about the governance banner are certainly also under the management banner, and I'll hope to try and draw out what the slight differences are about those as we go through. So governance is about providing leadership and strategic direction. It gives the project the vision and the purpose, ensures that the project is aligned to organizational objectives. And it is also there for guidance and support of the project manager and the wider project team as well. It ensures that the project is running in compliance with frameworks, be they corporate, legislative, or procedural. And it also provides that broader expertise and experience from members of the board and other senior people to the project, so that contextual element to it as well. It is also about setting boundaries and providing accountability. Certainly a project manager has delegated limits of authority. He or she can spend up to a certain amount before having to go back to the board to get more money or more time, etc., etc. And it is also about age delivery. The project goes through various stages in its life cycle, and the board is there, or the governance is there, to ensure that when you reach the end of one stage and before you go on to the next one, that the governance ensures what needs to have been done has been done, and that it's ready for the next stage. It is about control and decisions as well. So all about regular reporting and monitoring, ensuring that that's in place so that the board and the governance can understand what's going on. It puts in formal control and checks limits. And then finally, it is also about assurance and challenge. Is the project doing what it needs to be doing? Is it meeting the need? Are there regular reviews going on? Is the budget under control, etc., etc. And finally, governance is there to provide that confidence that the project is being done well. Before I move on, any questions? Okay. So I've tried to break this up into three sectors and the first that I'll be looking at is people. So under people, we've got three areas. We've got leadership, engaged stakeholders, and roles and responsibilities. So under leadership, it is about providing that strategic direction and vision and purpose that I mentioned before. How is the project linked to the organization's strategic objectives? And also, how are the benefits, or how have the benefits been identified, and how will they be realized? All of these things, while definitely do happen at the end of a project, they're also important at the beginning of a project and during a project. So all of these things are sort of undertaken through governance, as well as some management elements. It requires an empowered sponsor, and by extension, a project board, someone who's got skin in the game, who has the authority to make decisions, and who also has access to the resources required to deliver the project, because the sponsor will be the person who's delegating that responsibility and the authority to the project team and to the project manager to start delivering and using those resources. Also, it's about championing the project. This is someone who is a fierce supporter of the project, who advocates the project, is inspirational and motivational, and gets stakeholders on board. So where you have difficult stakeholders or people who are reluctant, who are not clear as to what's going on, yes, a lot of that is down to the project manager, but a significant amount of it, I'd say more so, is down to the leadership and the sponsor. Engage stakeholders. We've just spoken about stakeholders. So stakeholders are at all levels. It can be from the front line to CEOs, shareholders, managers, etc. And while a number of them will be involved with the project and at a project management level, a number of them are also involved at a governance level. And typically these would be senior business level stakeholders at board level who have an influence and who have a significant impact on the project. They're the ones who can make things happen. If you are working with a business expert, a manager, typically they won't have permission to do anything for your project unless their director agrees to it. And who's that director? If not an important stakeholder who needs to be managed, and typically that director will be managed at a senior level and by the board. Stakeholders need to have a shared understanding of the project. They need to know what the scope of the project is, what the requirements are, what the benefits are, as well as the risks, issues, and budget cuts, etc. They don't necessarily have to agree with all of those things, because quite often you will find stakeholders don't do that. But at least if they understand what it's meant to be delivering, then that's a big win on your side. Especially it is about those about how the project will impact them, their department, the people there who work for them, and their customers. So as long as your stakeholders understand that, then they are valid and relevant and important to your project. Stakeholders also provide that support and challenge. I've already mentioned that people working in a project will not be working in a project unless they have the agreement and approval of their managers and their directors. So that's where you're getting support from. They also, if they understand and agree with the deliverables of the project, they can also provide the support to help ensure it happens. At the same time, they're there to challenge as well. Are you delivering what you need to be delivering? Is it being delivered the right way? Are there going to be benefits? Is it going to impact their organization adversely? All of those things are what engaged stakeholder will be looking at. And then you've got roles and responsibilities. This is about who does what. It's about providing clear ownership to tasks and activities. At a simplest level, you've got people like the project sponsor or the chair of the board who are the single point of accountability for the whole project. Some of that accountability is delegated down to the project manager, who in turn will delegate that down to the project team. And also, something worth mentioning here is that the accountability is actually inherited by the board or the project sponsor from the corporate side of things. So the corporate board will typically hand over that responsibility to someone and say, we have a project, you sponsor it and you run it. And then they will go in and set the project up and get a project manager and a project team. Sorry, I just lost train of thought there. Okay, and it is also about empowering and enabling. So alongside passing on the accountability, it is also about empowering someone to be able to do something. The project sponsor is empowered by the board, the project manager is empowered by the sponsor, and the project team is empowered by the project manager. So all of the work and decisions that need to be made can be done by those who are allowed to do it. Equally important is clear boundaries, so that people don't tread on each other's toes. This is where something like a RACI diagram is very important. And while it is something that is done as a management task, that task is also done to support governance. Right. Before I move on, any particular questions?
Yeah, so there's one question there, thanks for that. There's one question which I will read from the chat, and then obviously we'll open it up to see if people have got questions that they want to verbally ask or discussion point. Okay, so the question through the chat is, how do you balance between too much and too little governance? I'm working with tight delivery timescales and need to balance between effective planning and delivery. So Dev, if you can address that, but we can open it up to the other mentors.
Sure.
So the balance between too much and too little.
Yes. So I think that's where experience counts for a lot, and that's where one of the in one of my future slides you'll see that's where the process and framework accounts for. So if you know what you're doing, if you have a process that you are following, then that helps for you to set limits on how much is too much and how much is too little. But also, it can also and make you do things that you are a bit unnecessary. So that's where the experience element comes into it. And as a new project manager, I would hope that you have a mentor, hint, hint, or you have someone who can give you that guidance and support. And typically that would be either your board or your project sponsor, who could then give you that rationale and context to say, do you really need to do this? And is it too much? I think one of the key lessons I've learned as a project manager is a lot of responsibility is on me to deliver, but it's also, if I'm not sure of something, I need to ask. I shouldn't just take it on and just say, I'll work it out, because that's the last thing you need to be doing as a project manager. You need to make sure that you are making things work, getting them delivered. And if you are not clear of something, that's who you go to your board or you go to your sponsor. That's me.
Thanks, Deb. And I think Ian Murphy and Tola may want to speak. Ian Murphy's off mute. Ian, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So, look, I suppose all projects need governance in some shape or form. The thing, when in relation to the question there, there are weekly governance which the PM runs, but then there's more formal sessions with the sponsor, and these are key sessions. I mean, monthly is probably a reasonable time frame for those. Often in organizations, the PMO or project management office will set guidelines around the frequency of these things. If you're in an organization with less structure, or that you're being asked to put in the structure, something like a monthly check-in is reasonable for a project sponsor. It might be needed, maybe one-to-one meetings with the sponsor on a fortnightly basis when the project is kicking off. But you sort of have to gauge it yourself as to how busy the various sponsors are. Are they involved in lots of different programs at the same time? And really tune the governance session to those key milestones or key decision points.
Thanks, Ian. And Tola?
Can you hear me?
We can, yes. Okay,
you can. I think what we mustn't do, though, is actually mix project management and control with governance. And I think Dev alluded to that earlier. Governance essentially is more the decision points which you want to make along the life cycle of the project, the program, and afterwards as well. And essentially, there are those quality gates which you would have to either get sign on or sign off from as you go through the projects. So invariably your day-to-day project management responsibility in terms of reporting to the board, it's either going to be done on a tolerance basis, where invariably if it exceeds certain things, then you have to report based on your various RAG statuses. But if it's to do with an agile project, for instance, invariably, because things have been defined, and so far as you do not go beyond the variance and what you set, you probably don't need to talk to anybody. But invariably, as I sort of said before, it's a journey along the life cycle, pre and post project. So invariably, if you are trying to get the project initiated, you're going to have decisions made in terms of whether it's feasible, whether it's strategically feasible, then the monetary aspect of things, and then you have these quality gates which somebody has to sign on of and sign off on, and these probably are the various boards which you would go to. So it's less about more governance, it's more about when do these decisions need to be made and what framework and structure you've got around these decisions that have to be made.
Just want to add one additional thing, just to support obviously what Ian, Tola and Dan say. We're talking about governance here, and we're talking about working with organizations, and often an organization may have its own expectations. You don't know it if you walk in as a PM or if you're just new to a piece of work. So as Deb said, the best thing you can do is reach out to the organization and say, okay, what's the minimum that you need? Because there's nothing worse than putting governance for governance sake. It'll just kill it. In some scenarios, and I've been in scenarios where the organization's been very mature and they're expecting a lot of governance, and then I've been in other organizations where, you know what, they've got no governance framework at all. So it's about finding the right balance, and the way to really get that is to engage, as the guys have said, with the stakeholders, with the sponsors, saying, okay, what is it that you need and how can I help? Because they will tell you. So if you, for example, like myself, if you're a freelance and you go from one organization that's very structured, very disciplined, and then you go to another one where it's completely opposite, you've got a catch chance in hell of being able to apply the same process. So reaching out to the organization and saying, well, what do you need, given the constraints that we have? They will advise you. And that's the best way to do it, fundamentally, I would suggest.
Okay, thanks. And look, there is a subsequent question, but just in terms of time, Dev, I'll get you to move on with the next slide, and then we'll come on to that question and others later.
Towards the end, I will give some examples, real life examples of projects that I've worked on where hopefully I'll touch on some of these elements of whether it's too much governance or too little governance. Okay, moving on. Next element is around the structure of the project. And a key element there is direction. Just bear with me while I catch up with myself. And this is linked. In fact, what you'll find as you go through this slide is that a lot of these things overlap and interlink with each other. And so they should. Nothing stands alone in its own right, pretty much in the same way as governance is not that independent from management. They are different, but they are linked. So this is about providing direction, providing that strategic context about why the project is linking with corporate and organizational objectives. It's what I would call top-level signposting. Go in this direction. This is what you need to be doing. It is also about enabling and making decisions to ensure that progress is being kept, as well as providing a check and balance to what's happening, so that as you're delivering and as things are happening, and you're reporting back to your project board in this instance, they're observing what you're doing and making sure that it is still going in the right direction. They shouldn't be interfering in what you're doing as a project manager, but they can certainly ask you questions and put you on the spot just to ensure that what's happening is happening the right way. And then it's also about about following policies and procedures that you need to, especially those that are applicable to your particular project, because not everything will be, and ones that are relevant to the organization. So the organization may have a certain way of releasing money, and you would need to include that in your project management, so that when you require more money, you can fill in the right forms and follow the right governance process to go and ensure that you get the money. Planning is a big element of this, which is obviously a part of project management. But before you get a project manager on board, there needs to be a plan of sorts. Typically at project startup, when you're producing a PID or producing the business case, it is something that governance is there to ensure is in place. You actually have a plan. And what does the plan consist of? Are there some clear milestones and constraints? Who's going to do it? How is it going to happen? All of these things are part of a plan, and from the governance perspective, it is to ensure that they're in there. And then also it is about monitoring, measuring, and controlling. You've got your plan, but how are you going to make sure you're keeping track? How are you going to make sure that you've achieved what you need to achieve? All of those things are monitored by governance. So while you as a project manager and the project team are actually doing the work, getting it done and making sure it is getting done, governance is there to ensure, okay, is it being done right? Are you really sure that it's there? It's that quality control that you need when you're delivering something. And then it is about assurance as well. So you've got your scrutiny and approval of those who have more experience or broader experience, who can provide a wider perspective, and who also have a different expertise. Because not everyone will be a technical expert, not everyone will be a project management expert. But what they do have is their specific skill sets: accountancy, business, finance, sales, all of those things which you as a project manager shouldn't necessarily have to be involved with, but at least they can then provide that element of context to it. And it's also about establishing, Tola mentioned this, those formal approval processes. When you've reached the end of a stage of a project, before you go on to the next one, someone needs to just QA the work you've done. Has it been done well? Have you achieved what you needed to achieve? Are you ready for the next stage? All of those things need to be done through governance. That's quite similar to check and counter check. Are things being done well? Have right decisions been made? It gives the project manager and the project team that feel-good factor. Are things being done well? And can someone tell me that I'm doing well? We all like to hear that things are going well and how good we're doing. But who's going to tell us that if not someone that is overlooking us and can see what we're doing? And then one of the things that we remember is that the project manager has no authority except that's delegated by the board. And that is a really key and important process here, because a project manager in reality can do a lot, can set things in motion, can allocate resources, can allocate people to work on certain things. But ultimately, that's at the best of the board or the project sponsor. So that's another element of assurance. Someone can check and make sure that is the project manager acting within his or her authority. Any questions on that? Okay, I'll move on.
Okay, Dev, let me just give people a chance to unmute themselves
Sure.
if they need to. Just, I know you were ready to move on, but just 2 more seconds, please. Look, if anyone needs to ask a question, just as a reminder, please use the chat function or unmute yourself. But no one's going off mute. So yeah, actually Ian Murphy has come off, so maybe he's got a comment to make.
Yeah, I just had a question there about KPIs in relation to governance. Some organizations will, often it's run by the PMO, they will have a KPI measure against the amount of governance sessions that are happening across their program portfolio. But it's generally a light enough KPI. The thing is, these sessions should be put in where appropriate, rather than being a rigid, you have to have one every X amount of weeks. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, that was good. I'm glad you picked up on that. I was going to raise it later, but yeah, absolutely. And then one thing I'll just mention, then I've been quiet, but I'll mention before we move on, is that I found that actually setting up some regular governance meetings, whether they're every fortnight, every week, every 3 days, whatever is necessary for your organization, is good to set up, but with the view that before that session is about to take place, you ask the question, do we still need it? is this valid? And then you cancel them, right? So there's a trade-off though. If you get into a routine of canceling too many, then actually they're all given lip service. So there's, with all of this, and I think to the fundamental of the basic question is what's right? Too much, too little, etc. And I think great question, and obviously not one that's easy to answer in that it just depends on the scenario, but all good points that have been provided so far. Yeah. So back to you, Dev, to carry on.
Thank you. And Alim, just to finish off on what you were saying, if you have a board or a project sponsor who's actually keeping tabs and is pretty much on board with what you're doing, then they will pick up on that. They will say, why are you cancelling the meetings? Why are you not telling us what we need to know? Why are you not sending us our reports as we want them? So that's a sign of a good governance level that you have in your project. Okay, moving on to the final stack, which is information. And as with everything that we all do, communicate, communicate, communicate. This is so important in anything that we do, especially in project management and in governance. It is about observing, keeping an eye on the project, identifying risks, identifying issues, monitoring your constraints. And this is where the board or whoever's leading on governance what they should be doing is looking at your project, looking at the reports and records that you're providing, and making sure that things are being done. On the reporting side, it is about simplifying and standardizing reports, making them easy and quick to do. I've worked on projects where you've had 3-4 pages of complicated dashboards with graphs and tables and all of these things. And does anyone ever look at them? Certainly on my project, no one did. And what they would rely on is the project manager's update based on all of those things. Now, all of that time and effort has gone into putting those dashboards. They look great and they're very colorful, but are they actually of use? So it is about being standardizing and not complicating things. But it is also about keeping clear records and documentation. Not too much, but not too little either. Now, where's the balance on that? It is about knowing what's pragmatic, what is functional to your project. If you're running a project that's worth £50,000 or is going to deliver that you only have very limited resources, then you don't want tons and tons of projects, of documents and artifacts. But if you've got a project that's a £50 million project, well, you are not going to get away from documents and artifacts, and you will then need document management, you will need change control, and you will need all of those elements that are required to actually monitor and manage the project going forward. And then finally, it is about listening to the stakeholders. What are they saying? And this isn't just about stakeholders who are involved with the project or who are in the project, such as the project team or the project manager, but it's also what are the wider stakeholders that the project is impacting on saying. And now, it may not be those people who are directly impacted, but it may be someone who's critical about why your project is taking up so much resource, whereas their project isn't getting enough resource. That's where governance and at senior levels, your sponsor should be able to step in and allay some of those fears and necessities. So it is about listening and hearing what's happening. And then being transparent, providing readily information, easily accessible information, looking at different ways of communicating, using newsletters, regular updates, Q&A sessions, Zoom, etc. It is about making sure that information is available, it is transparent, and also remembering that not everyone has project management experience. Not everyone is a technical person. So tailoring your communications and your information to suit each and every type of audience. And it is also about open and honest reporting. A project manager needs to report issues and problems as they are and not sugarcoat them for the project board, because that just hides the problem. And if the board or if your senior people do not understand the issues you're facing, further downstream you'll face even worse issues. And then it is also about keeping track of your project, of your progress, being clear about the budget, being clear about the time being spent, communicating communicating any changes to what has previously been agreed, looking at reporting new deadlines, looking at scope changes or scope creep even, and looking at especially delays, because no project that I've ever worked on, I hope that doesn't say anything about the projects that I've managed, but no project has ever delivered on time. Everything is always shifted to the right. And that's because when you start a project, you expect something to be delivered at a particular time, but things always change. But don't hide that. It is something that you need to be very upfront and open about. And as a project manager, you will appreciate the fact that you are able to report these things up to the board and not having to worry about it. And then on the process side, we've touched on this again a little bit. It's about frameworks, procedures, and standards, meeting and following relevant and necessary corporate and regulatory processes, ensuring consistency in how things are done. And I think consistency is something that's quite important. If you've got a process that you can follow day in, day out, the same kind of reports, simple standards, simple templates, then it's easier to report against those. And then we're looking at, from a governance perspective, the external interface, ensuring that processes are in place to link to other initiatives, projects, and programs. For example, when a project's being initiated, is there an overlap or duplication with another project? Is it contrary or is it different and opposing that's being done somewhere else? All of those things need to be taken into consideration before a project even starts. And then at project closure, how are you going to track the benefits? Who's going to track those benefits? It's certainly not going to be the project because the project has been closed. What lessons can be learned that can be used for future and other projects? All of those things are typically dealt with at a governance level. Can I just check everyone is still there, because you've disappeared?
Yeah, no, we're here.
Yes,
carry on. And there's good questions being asked in the chat room, so we'll
okay, I'm nearly done. Sorry, I'll just let me go back to. I'm still sharing, aren't I?
You are in a different view this time. Now you're back to normal. I think someone was going to maybe look. Let's just take that opportunity to see if there is a question for you. But otherwise,
yeah. I mean, the last one was just about keeping things simple, open, and regular. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Any questions that you want to ask of Dev verbally before I look into the chat area and read some of those? Okay, remember to unmute yourself if you need to. So look, Dev, while we're waiting for that, but it's kind of been answered anyway, but it's just for everyone to kind of hear from you as well, so to verbalize it. A question was asked, let me just find it. Yes, communication is vital in a project. During the current pandemic months, how many meetings or video conferences would be enough? So I guess this is to do with this new way we're working, so many meetings being put in people's diaries right now. What's your view on online meetings, and how many is enough, and end interactions, etc.? And by the way, like I said, it's already been answered in the chat. It's just there for you personally to verbalize it.
Sure, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. How long is a piece of string? I think this is where your experience and your pragmatism and what is realistically possible comes into play. Do you really need to have those daily updates that you may have set up? Are you really going to make progress between today and tomorrow? Certainly if you're working in an agile environment and you're working in a Scrum environment where things are happening on a daily basis, then perhaps, yes, you need those 10, 15-minute chats in the morning. But for other longer bits of work, do you really need that? At a governance level, governance should be done by exception. It is about handing over responsibility to the project team and to the project manager and saying, here's the project, deliver it, let us know if things are going wrong, or keep us informed, and we are here to help and support you as and when you need it. So there is an element of also not over governing a project and program. Again, I would urge you to ask your board and ask your sponsor, how many meetings do you want? Sometimes, and quite often, they will say, oh, I don't need to know anything, just keep me updated once in a while. Well, that's also a bit of a bit disengaged, and that also is a problem for projects and programs. So it is a case of asking and understanding what is possible and doable, but then also putting in those realistic and fixed time checks that you can actually go to a regular board and say, yep, we don't have much to report except this is how far we've got now. And if the board ends up finishing in half an hour rather than an hour and a half, that's all the better. But at least you've got them in the room, or at least you've got them in front of you on a screen, and you're talking to them. So shortly,
let me move us on to the next question, if I may. But just one comment I'll make on that. So just one comment I'll make, which I know is a bit challenging in this kind of environment, is some people, of course, want to show that they're involved as well, right? They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about not being in office, not being seen. So I think there probably is quite a lot of meetings for meetings' sake. So it is difficult, and other people have answered this in the chat room anyway. But let me just move on to the next question, if I can. So again, for Dev, because it's been answered, but in your view, Dev, who's responsible for project governance in an organization?
Who's responsible for project governance? Well, I think it's a shared responsibility. It obviously starts with a project sponsor. They're the people who are meant to lead on governance, but quite typically they will hand over to a project manager. So the way it tends to work, and I appreciate every project is different, but the way it tends to work is that the company or the organization will come up with an initiative and say, we want to do this. They will nominate someone to lead on that. That person becomes a project sponsor. They're typically at quite a high level. They're a director, and they're running many things and doing many other things. So one of the first things they will do is appoint a project manager, and they will then hand over the running of the project to the project manager. So the project manager will then go ahead and certainly on the projects that I've run, I will then go ahead and set up the governance. I will put in the terms of reference. I will select or identify the people that need to be on the board, but then consult with the project sponsor to say, are these the right people? They may agree or they may not. And then invitations to join the board would go out on behalf of the project sponsor. So work to do the governance is typically going to be done by a project manager, but the governance is still going to be a separate and discrete task and activity.
Thanks, Dave. And I'll just add on Ian Murphy's behalf, and then we'll progress, because he mentioned a really good point as well. In the larger organizations, larger complex programs, projects, often the PMO provides the governance framework. So yeah, it may be project managers, but from an organizational point of view, it might be the PMO, of course. But I think that's well answered. So Dev, back to you, and we'll do more Q&A at the end.
Yeah, and then just, I think this is fine, and this is almost the last slide. Some examples of governance that I've actually experienced. I've worked on a project where when I took over, there were 14 board members. And this, I think, alludes to someone's question about how much governance is too much governance. Well, the problem with that particular project was there were 14 board members who were only there because they expected to be. There were senior members who expected to be on a board because that's what they did. But they didn't really add much value. They didn't really know much about the project, and that was, to my mind, certainly one of the key reasons why the project was failing. So again, with the project sponsors' backing and agreement, we got rid of the board and set up a brand new board that was a bit leaner and a bit more agile and allowed the project to be delivered. Similarly, and typically in public sector organizations, there will be multiple levels of governance. You'll have your project board, you'll have your departmental board, you'll have the cabinet office who might want to have their say. You might have treasury who's lending you money who will have their say. And they will all have their own forms of assurance and governance that are overlapping and duplicating each other. And it is the job of a good project manager to actually push back on some of those things and say, look, I'm already providing one level of assurance here. Is that not enough for me for you, rather than having to fill in a different form that's actually saying the same thing in a different way? Another example of bad practice is a sponsor who inherited a project from his predecessor who had moved on to a new job. The sponsor was not really interested in this project. He had his own agenda. And while a lot of money and effort had already been on this particular project, they really were only there because the money and time had been spent. So they weren't really engaged, and as a result, the project failed and, well, didn't quite fail, but struggled and just pottered along until it finally was closed. And then again, another one is about a failing project that was kept hidden from stakeholders. Because it was failing, they didn't want it to look bad. They didn't want to look bad. They wanted to see across the board. Anything that was orange or red was kept off the board. And again, that obviously meant that there was no visibility about the project failing. Resources and money were being spent, but nothing was being done. So that's really where poor governance, that was really due to poor governance, because it was at board level where decisions were made about keeping these projects hidden. On the good practice side, certainly having a clear business case from the beginning. A lot of projects start off with PIDs. There is an element of a business case, but then quickly that business case is forgotten, and project life takes over, and things start getting delivered. But you need to make sure that you keep revisiting the business case. Are you still meeting what was actually set out to be met? So that continuous cross-check is what, to my mind, a board should be doing. I've set up projects with 3 members on the board to begin with, because that's all that we really needed. And we then grew the board as the project increased in size and went on to deliver stuff. And then finally, it was about that a board with skin game. Those 3 members that I had on the board, they actually were going to be impacted by whatever was delivered. In fact, I would say that the project sponsors' bonus was dependent on how well this project was delivered. So they definitely had skin in the game. And with board members who have that level of engagement, they will actively look for options to help you to succeed. So that is something where good practice comes in. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dev. So I will unmute all and see if there are questions for Dev or discussion points. Please unmute yourself if you're not unmuted, but do you have anything that you would like to ask Dev, or a point that you'd like to make? Seems like there may not be any. Tola, I know you wanted to show a slide. Do you want to take the screen and do that? Before we hand over to Tola, can I just, because of some of the questions we had yesterday, I added 2 other slides. One was about RACI, which I'll leave on this one. So it's just a high-level example and some tips on how to produce and analyze a RACI diagram. And then the second one is about frameworks and methodologies. There are any number of these frameworks and methodologies, and there's no right one. So I think it's really dependent on your organization, what your organization is used to, the level of education and understanding of project management that there is within your group, and also what works best for all of you. So those are the only the 2 main things I just wanted to add. Yeah, no, great.
Which ones are organizations looking for, now? I mean, a few years ago it was Prince2. Do people still really want Prince2? I know it says so on job descriptions, but is there any value in doing Prince2 again? I mean, it's such a terrible...
Oh.
Did you have some bad experiences with Prince2, Hilary?
It was the most waste of time of 2 days of my life.
Oh, no.
Where I got very good at putting post-its in the book. But there was some good knowledge in it. But yeah, I mean, my Prince2 is probably about 10 years out of date. Should I do it again, or would it be best to go and get a PMP? Again, I did an agile course maybe 10 years ago, a certified one. Does that last for life, or should I get a more recent one?
Hilary, I think it's a great question. I think we're going to regret you asking it, in that I'm sure we're going to have multiple views now, but it's actually a great question, because I'm sure there's numerous people on the call that actually have a view on this. So let's start with Dev, but then I will move on to some of the other mentors as well. But great question. So Dev, what's your view?
Sure. So Hilary, my perspective is that you can be qualified in any number of things. So I'm Prince2 qualified, I'm Agile qualified, I've done RAD, I've done DSDM, Prince2, and all of those things. I think the important thing there is that these are frameworks, and they are there to help and guide you. I know of Prince2 project managers who actually run literally what Prince2 says you need to be doing, and I thought perhaps that's been your experience. But that's not the way these frameworks are meant to be used, at least from my perspective. They're there to help you deliver what needs to be delivered, so you choose what needs to be done. And they provide guidance, they provide that process that allows you to say, right, okay, I've done this, what should I be doing next? But then that's where your experience and expertise comes in to say, I really need to do exactly what they're saying, or can I, merge it with something else and at least continue with progress. So Agile is very much in the forefront at the moment, but it's not suitable for everything. Prince2 also is used quite a lot, but certainly all of the other ones that I've listed on here, they're all used to a certain degree depending on the type of project and program it is.
Yes.
Thanks, Dev.
Just to add on to what Dev's saying, so as you quite rightly said, Dev, Prince2, it's a framework. It's a step by. This is what you do from here to here to here. But the point is, and I think in the later versions of the Prince2 framework teachings, they say, look, we're not expecting you to consume this lock, stock, and barrel. Tailor it to whatever's appropriate for you. And you know, if you bring a little bit of one framework in and you mix it in with others, then fine. It doesn't matter. There's no such thing as a perfect way of doing it. It's whatever's right for you and your organization. So that's why they use, and in fact, APM as well say it. I think PMI say it as well. It's about tailoring it to fit what is suitable and appropriate for the organization and the piece of work that you're doing. Because I don't know anybody, and Dev, I appreciate you've been in the industry for long enough, but I don't know anybody who does Prince2 verbatim as it says in the manual, because that's not how we are.
I didn't really mean that I thought anybody was, but really, you know, what do organizations want? So if I was to go out and spend some money on a new certification to update my CV a bit, which one would be best?
Perhaps I would suggest you try something. Just going to say, perhaps you try, because you've already shown that you can do Prince2, and Prince2, while it has evolved over the last 10 years, I think that it hasn't significantly changed. Yeah. And these certifications are just there to provide that evidence that yes, you know what you're talking about. So I think, from my perspective, it doesn't matter which one you want to choose. Choose something that you're interested in doing.
I've got a slightly
Hello.
different.
Sorry,
Tolly.
Let's let Gary. Let's let Tola come in, just because she wanted to share a slide before anyway. So go on, Tola, your view.
Well, I'll just talk about the Prince2 and the management responsibility. Ultimately, it's the project which dictates the methodology you use, as opposed to the other way around. Invariably, yes, Agile is a concept. I think what we seem to be mixing up is Agile as a concept and Agile from a project management point of view. There's only one proper Agile project management qualification, which is called Agile PM, as well as the Agile Prince2 addition to Prince2. Now, the problems with a lot of these things, if you haven't got Prince2, is that they tell you to go and do something, to create a document within, for instance, Agile PM, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. Whereas Prince2, you know how to do it because invariably. So that's the background of Prince2, and it's got an Agile addendum to it, and it's a methodology. I think also, then you've got your body of knowledges, which is what is offered by APM as well as the PMI. And those essentially are body of knowledges which give you a holistic and detailed view of project management, as opposed to the methodologies, which are specific ways of doing things. And then you've got the information system development methodologies, which is essentially your Scrum, your Kanban, your Lean, your V method, your SDLC, which essentially is to deliver products within your projects. So I think sometimes we tend to be mixing all these two together. So if you were a newbie on the scene, young, doesn't have much project management experience, I'll tell you to go and do the body of knowledge, which will give you a wealth of experience, and then go and do, what's it called? The Agile addendum to it. Because ultimately, if a project is known, if you know what you need to do, if there's no clarity, if they're not going to change their mind, use a waterfall method because it's straightforward. If there is no clarity, if you're going to have to iterate, if you're going to have to trial and see, suck it and see, people are going to change their mind, then an agile approach will be. But agile is expensive, but then again, it's cost effective in the sense that you can chuck it if it doesn't, if, you know, you can what's the word, fail fast, as it were. So there's a whole gamut of things, and it depends on what you want to do. But the Prince 2, which you've got, I would see as a what's the word, it's something in your back pocket, because even if you take an agile approach, as I said earlier, they will say, go and produce a document, but they won't tell you how. Whereas your Prince 2 will enable you, because you have an understanding of how these things need to be done. So
yeah, okay, thanks.
All right.
So, so any other questions? I know others may want to come back onto the point that Hilary asked, but let me just see if there's any other questions by anyone else. Any discussion points, questions anyone else wants to raise? There's something in the chat. Okay, it's just an agreement. Okay, so look, I think we are maybe coming to an end. I'm going to have to wrap it up. Let me just make one point, if I may, Hilary, to yourself. Are you based in the UK, Hilary?
Yes.
Okay, so from my experience, if I could just add that if your question was primarily about your next role, so not what you would actually use you know, to deliver a project, but about your next role, the fact that you have Prince 2 already, doesn't matter if it's old, you know, you have that on your CV because you mentioned CV, then in my experience, doing some form of agile certification, whatever it is, agile PM, Scrum, even though that's not technically agile, the Prince 2 agile, I think is definitely the buzzword, is what people are looking for. So I would wholly recommend that you forget everything else if you're just doing it from a CV, new job perspective, and go for one of the agile qualifications, with Prince 2 agile maybe being the flavor of the month, especially where you've got some Prince 2 knowledge, and it's more relevant for the UK. Whereas if you're in another country, it may be something else. Okay, I know there'll be differing views, but that's my view on if you're job hunting.
Okay, thanks very much.
Alim, is there any time to share this slide?
We have 2 minutes, so absolutely. Go ahead, Tola.
Let's see if I can. Hopefully it will work this time.
Go for it. So at the moment, we're not seeing your screen. It's about to change. We can. So over to you, Tola.
Okay, let me make sure it works from this slide. Essentially, this is a slide I produced for which shows the governance process for a piece of work which we did in, I wouldn't say where, but you may be able to see it there. But I set this up and I identified these are the quality gates we had to go through to actually get this piece of work delivered. And as you can see, I also adapted it for an agile environment. So it shows for both, what's the word? Waterfall as well as agile. So essentially it's just stepping through it. At the top level, it actually identifies who the gate approvers are for each of those items. And it also depends on if it's below 5 million or above 5 million. And it shows you the path in which you need to go through. So if I start from the beginning, essentially it was a case of, we wanted to sort of see that the portfolio board had approved it. It would then go through that, and then we would establish the strategic offline business case to sort of see whether, from a feasibility point of view, if it was feasible and if we could deliver it. If we could, then we would go through gate 0, and that would be signed off, and that would be signed off depending on what the value of the sign off was, whether it was TechET or SCLT. So invariably, you're going to go through the various things, and then we had to do an outline business case once we'd actually said, yes, it was strategically feasible. And as a result of that, we had to do a preliminary design. And then if you look at the top level there, the TDA had to sign that off. That was part of the TDA forum, which had to do that sign off. And once we had that sign off done, then it was a case of actually doing a critical design review, as well as looking at operational readiness. So these are various design steps and steps we had to go through in actually getting approval, but also through the delivery process as well. I don't know if you can see along the middle line, you know, we had DP4, where from a delivery point of view, we had to make sure that the solution architect actually signed that off as well. And then before we actually went into private beta. So this is, you know, this is what I was sort of saying. You would walk through the life cycle of the project from post-project, pre-projects, through the project life cycle itself. And you probably might also include things like service introduction as well as part of your governance process. So
Tola, let me stop you there. Sorry if I can, because I know there's more aspects, but we're out of time. Yeah. I know some people want to talk. So I want to just take the opportunity to thank Deb for his presentation and everyone else that, of course, got involved. So I agree, great slide to show us, Tola. So, you know, and it's being recorded, so obviously people could refer to that later. If you would like to book a one-to-one session with Tola to go over this in more detail, then through the Slack channel, obviously go to her calendar, select some time with her and do that. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you to all. Great session, and I will see you on the session later today or the ones tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very
much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.